The weather is heating up here in Montreal. It's already hot in Florida, where our guest Alex Donno is joining us from. And the Scudetto race, as always, it's hot this season. Here on the Calcio guys with Gianni, Adriano, I'm Nicholas. But Alex, it's been a while. It's been 2 years. I checked. It's been 2 years since you've been on the pod.
Oh,
How's it going, man?
wow. Time
Yeah,
flies.
yeah.
Jesus.
Wow. 2 freaking years.
Too long. 2 long years.
Yeah.
2 years too long. Well, how's it going, Alex?
I'm happy to be back. I miss you guys, and I miss shout out to Jerry Mancini if you're watching this. He's got a little one at home now, so he's, I know, very busy changing diapers all day and the feedings and all that. I remember what it was like to have a newborn, and yeah, it's I'm really enjoying Serie A this season. I mean, you mentioned Scudetto race as every time, weeks ago, we felt like for a while maybe Inter had a chance to pull away, and then Inter hit a bad run of form. Is Napoli going to pull away? You obviously, sorry about that Juventus match over the weekend against Atalanta, but that was important for the Scudetto race as well. So this has been as exciting as I've remembered it, because over at least the past couple of seasons, when Milan won the Scudetto a few years ago, it was a pretty close race. Like, Inter had an opportunity. It was neck and neck, but then Napoli won it by a mile 2 seasons ago. Inter won it by a mile last year. All those years when Juventus was winning Scudetti, most of those weren't close. So it's really nice to get a Scudetto race like this where, with about 10 match days left, you feel like it's totally up for grabs.
No, absolutely, Alex, and it's a great way to start. I think you kicked it off perfectly. I think like you said, all those teams are in the mix, and maybe a lot of people didn't think maybe Atalanta would be there, but it's good to see them into the mix there. But as an Inter fan, was this where you expected to be at this point in the season, like at the business end of the season? Like, obviously the goal is to win every year. That's great, and it's always an objective, but the top 4 obviously is the biggest thing. But as an Inter fan, and just seeing the competitions that you would be in, and just seeing how the season would unfold, is this kind of where you envisioned Inter to be, like I said, in the business end of the season?
Yes and no. Heading into the season, I felt that Inter probably had, obviously a proven squad, being pretty similar to the one that won the Scudetto last season. Certainly the quality to be able to defend the Scudetto. So I did expect to be, either first or hanging around first this time of year. So that's the yes. I'll say the no would be as the season has progressed. We'll talk more about this, I'm sure. Inter, to me, haven't played consistently nearly as good football as they played last season. So just based on the form and on really just the lack of killer instincts in the big matches. Like, Inter have overall taken care of business against, the teams that you're supposed to beat, which, actually the reason why Inter are in first place right now is that the other, teams in the Scudetto race have had more trouble, beating the teams that they're supposed to beat. But when Inter have these big matches, they haven't been able to put Napoli away. Milan has kind of been Inter's daddy this year. Have gotten big results against Inter so far this season. We'll do it again in Coppa pretty soon. I feel like Milan all the time, Inter versus Milan. Inter struggled against Juventus. They had the 4-4 draw that they should have won. They had the 1-0 loss, and so it's like when you're, and Inter have done well against Atalanta, and we'll play them again this weekend. They beat them 4-0 the first time they played them this season. So that was like the one, good result that Inter got against top competition. Other than that, Inter really, if you just look at it that way, against top competition, you don't really feel like they have any business being in first, but they're in first by a slim margin because of the attack and the consistency of goal scoring, even though Lautaro has been up and down this year. Inter still have scored a ton of goals this season. And, you've been able to see, players like Lautaro, Thuram at times, Barella, Çalhanoğlu, like, even when Inter in certain games haven't played that well, the individual quality of a handful of the world-class players that they have been able to make the difference in some of the close games. I mean, Inter were just down 2-0 against Monza. Were able to turn that game around, and that really, I think, speaks a lot to the individual quality. So it's one of those things. And then moving forward in the Scudetto race, I can't confidently say whether it's going to be Inter or Napoli or even Atalanta, because again, like, normally Inter being in this position of having even the slightest of leads, last season, couple seasons prior, they would have been able to have like the quality to hold on to that lead and close it out. But they've been a little bit unpredictable this season. So I don't know how confident I feel in this group and actually closing it out and seeing it through. So I'm going to be on the edge of my seat for the next couple of months, guys.
Well,
Just sitting like low bar, huh? So you don't get disappointed.
Donno mind games. Donno mind games.
Sorry to interrupt, Johnny.
But it's hard. It's hard not to feel that way. Again, because you're going to, like, I'm a little bit nervous about the match this weekend. Have to go to Bergamo to take on Atalanta. It's going to be a very, very tough game to win because Inter, again, they've not really been decisive in the big games. It's been, they've been able to drop very few points against the lesser opponents.
But like that, so this weekend it's a non-lesser opponent, and you've mentioned 2 out of 3. It's basically Atalanta Inter on the 16th. What are you like? So you just emphasize the importance of it. I'm obviously stressing out. I'm going to have a big eye on that game because right now the difference between Napoli and Inter is only 1 point, and that Como game has been really costly for Napoli. So I'm kind of hoping something happens here. But how do you feel going into this matchup right now, especially with the tight race that you just emphasized for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of momentum heading into the weekend, getting a good result and advancing through Champions League, and being able to not exert yourselves too much against Feyenoord in either of those 2 legs. And Inter have had some injuries, specifically at the wing back spots. But at center back, it sounds like De Vrij is going to be able to return this weekend, which will be big because the depth on defense has really been tested for Inter in recent weeks. Di Marco, I don't think we're going to see him for a while longer, and Darmian, but having De Vrij back is going to be big. And you like to have that confidence of advancing to the quarterfinals in Champions League and doing it on a Tuesday. So at least you get, because I think the match with Atalanta is Sunday. So you're going to get a decent amount of rest heading into that. It's not like a 3 or 4 day turnaround. And, having coming off a victory where you were able to rest some of your players, Inter were able to put 2 Primavera players on in the late stages against Feyenoord, which I think was nice to give them a little bit more rest. And so it's one of those feelings heading into it where you really have no excuse but to go in there and get a result. I mean, being without a guy like Di Marco obviously could, make things a little bit tougher for you with his creativity and what he's able to do on set pieces. But Inter will have most of their horses, including Jan Sommer being healthy again in goal. Although Josep Martinez did a really good job. Like, I didn't feel like they didn't skip a beat with the backup keeper, which is always, that's why you pay your backup keeper, presumably over €1 million, is to be able to step in. But Sommer being back is big. And, Inter have certain players who are on really good form. And obviously Atalanta is riding high after the big result that they just got 4-0. So it's going to be a tough game, but you feel like if Inter come out of it, with a draw or God forbid a loss, you'd say you have no one to blame but yourselves for it, because there's really no excuse not to go in there and get 3 points out of that match.
Let's talk about before talking about Champions League, I still want to circle back to Serie. Last weekend kind of was the comeback weekend for the Milan teams, 3-2. Obviously, we want to focus on Inter, but to go down 2-0, to get one back right away before halftime and to climb back 3-2, but third goal with technically an own goal from Monza. Is this a game where some people could say Inter got lucky with the own goal? You could say it takes skill to come back from 2-0. Is it a bit of both? What did you make of the game on the weekend?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. You could. I mean, it was literally about a millimeter away from being a 2-2 draw instead of a 3-2 win. And thank goodness for goal line technology. And listen, the goal line technology, I understand, is a pretty cut and dry thing. And that if you look at the image that came out of it, there was like this much space between the ball and the line. And so it's a good goal. It was a good opportunity. So Inter obviously had some good scoring chances. They should have converted on. They should have done better and put some chances away early on in the match. But so a little bit of luck to have the 3-2 versus a 2-2, because a 2-2 would have been very deserved. The 3-2 is maybe a little bit lucky. And again, I thought that game against Monza is the perfect illustration of how Inter have been too inconsistent this season, because I feel like last year's Inter squad at home, probably that's a 3-0, 4-0 type of result last season. But this season, play with your food a little bit more. The squad is a little bit more beat up than I think it was this time of year last year. And you have to rely on really heart and grit to come back and win the match. And of course, you had a really important goal by Marko Arnautovic to get the one back before halftime, to be only down 2-1, rather than down 2-0, which was big. Çalhanoğlu has an absolute wonder strike, which is, something, he's good for a couple times per season. And, the own goal maybe being a little bit lucky, but it's one of those matches where for as much as they made me sweat it out watching the game, the only thing that really matters this time of year, guys, is the result. Like, it's the only thing that matters. And, this is the sort of Inter that can look very decisive in a Champions League game. And yet when they go up against, the 20th team on the Serie A table, can look really shaky at home. It doesn't really always add up. I guess that goes back to the old Pazze Inters coming back a little bit. But, to put the positive spin on what happened against Monza, I mean, and same thing can be said for Milan with what they did. It's a great show of character to be down 2-0. Because I'm old enough to remember, when Serie A was such a more defensive league. In the 90s, early 2000s, you were down 2-0. That was a wrap. Like, you're not coming back from that in Serie A. But Inter showing the character to do that, I thought was big, because every single point counts for the Scudetto race. And had they lost that match, you drop points to the 20th team in the table. A Scudetto finish would seem pretty perilous had they not gotten 3 points out of that.
Yeah, and honestly, I still think and I think we can all kind of agree, and even if we don't want to, but Inter, despite the doubt, despite maybe the inconsistencies and what have you, are the best team in Italy. It is what it is at this point. They're the best team, not only on paper but on the pitch. The results speak for themselves. I kind of just want to circle back to this weekend's game, Alex, quickly. What obviously, the result of that match, I think, is probably has the Scudetto implications on it, if not, unless, some calamity happens for the other teams. But what's it going to take for Inter to pick up the 3 points, and what are you looking for in the team to pull through for that victory?
Yeah. You talking about coming up this weekend against Atalanta, coming up on Sunday?
Exactly.
Yeah. I really, it's going to take, I just believe full energy from the start, because a lot of times this year, and again, this is, I'm shooting straight here. I'm not trying to make excuses or anything.
Yeah.
And it goes to, certain times when we've seen teams like Juventus go on crazy runs, Scudetto after Scudetto after Scudetto, deep runs in Champions League. All of that is so physically taxing. And I can't help but feel, in a lot of the moments when Inter haven't been at their best this season, they've looked very tired, like having to do this in 3 and at times 4 competitions, because they were in Supercoppa as well until the finals against Milan. So to be doing this in 3-4 competitions consistently, and now, no one else in Serie A is still in Champions League, and the majority of teams are no longer playing in multiple competitions. So it's very taxing. So I think against Atalanta this weekend, and the crowd in Bergamo is always great, and it's so close to Milano that I know that they get extra loud when one of the Milan teams are in their building. So I think getting a goal early is going to be really important if they can, maybe find the back of the net in the first 15 minutes, because, sometimes when you get towards the second half without a goal, and two teams that really, obviously both teams really need 3 points, but 1 point is better than nothing. So you wonder, if no one scores in the first half, does it get a little bit more cagey and tight in the second half, and maybe the match doesn't open up and you head more towards a 0-0 type of draw? So I really think scoring early is important, and I would like to see. I want to see Thuram stay hot. Scored a really good goal and should have had a second one against Feyenoord in Champions League on Tuesday. He really seems like he's catching fire again because he, in recent weeks he had an injury and he was coming back and kind of playing through it, but he didn't really look like himself. So if Thuram is truly back to full fitness and Lautaro has gotten hot again as well, I mean, if the two of them can kind of reach full power again in their partnership, I think that's what you need to beat a team like Atalanta. You need your forwards to be at their best, and I think you need to score in the first 15, 20 minutes to settle that crowd down a little bit and build some momentum.
And speaking for Serie, so far, like it seemed like Inter is just doing very well on both fronts. Do you feel like as if this is something that the momentum that can contain, like they can maintain? Do you think they have that quality, and this is probably like the same Inter we've seen a few years ago when they made the Champions League final and unfortunately lost to Man City, which I think honestly they probably could have easily won that game. They just played very well. But do you think this is something that is sustainable this year around, or do you think it's going to be like a different story towards the end? Do you feel like as if maybe they might just swap attention from one or the other?
It seems to me like they're going all in to try to make as deep a possible run in both competitions. And I'm not just saying that because it's the right thing to say, but I really, when I had, and I'm very superstitious, guys, so I didn't really like it when I saw Simone Inzaghi making a comment about going for the treble in a weekend presser. Like, I'm like, don't do, you don't have to say that out loud. Like, you can do it. You have to say it out loud. But, but that really seems to be the goal. Like, they don't want to punt on any of these competitions. And, I think that would be, and of course, I'm not predicting a treble for Inter, don't get me wrong, but I'm saying that they're going to go for it because that would really be, the next milestone for Inzaghi and for this cycle to get as close to that as possible, right? I mean, trebles are not easy. It's only been done once in the history of Italian football, but going for that, because, Inzaghi has had the Coppa trophy, Supercoppa, finally got his Scudetto this past season with Inter, and to try to really be dominant in both competitions, Champions League and Serie A at once, would kind of be the icing on the cake for him, because it's usually been a one or the other. Because when Inter had that run to the Champions League final, it was a little bit of a down campaign that year in Serie A. I think they were second, but probably could have done better in that competition, but had the deeper run in Champions League. I think this season, what it's going to take to get there, it's hard for me to even imagine, because when you're playing Calcio, 2 times per week on a consistent basis, Inzaghi needs to be really, really wise with the rotation in terms of, being deep enough at certain positions in the midfield, being able to, in the first half, sometimes giving a rest to Çalhanoğlu or maybe taking him out around the 60th minute, which means a player like Aslani is really going to have to become more consistent. Someone who I'm happy to see has had an uptick in form recently is Marko Arnautovic. He's looked like a different player, and you need him to step up, because what you have gotten from Mehdi Taremi, that guy looks like he's playing for the other team when he's on the pitch. When Taremi is on the pitch, all of his touches end in giveaways. Like it's the most frustrating thing. And Arnautovic looked like that for a while, but Arnautovic has really picked up his game, and he's in a good run of form. And, Inter have, I'm not even sure if Joaquin Correa is healthy at this moment, because you never know with him, but he's had a couple of appearances recently, and, it's a little bit of like sizzle, but not consistent enough on the pitch. And a guy like Davide Fratesi, I think, is really important, because he's been, at times either a super sub or a spot starter. And Fratesi is someone, and I like the player a lot, but I don't always feel like he's the best fit at Inter, because he's very good going forward, but I don't think he gives you enough box to box, and he doesn't track back very well. To try to compare him to someone like a Barella, it's like a big difference in just the style of play with the way that Barella fits with Inter, and Fratesi not so much. But Fratesi is a quality player, and so. If players like Arnautovic and Fratesi, and of course, depth pieces like Bisek and of course Pavard in the three-man back line, to be able to get consistently good stuff from some of these guys who aren't usually, they're not usually the protagonists, but to be able to have them step up and play big, because depth is what gets you through. Like, you have to have a strong mentality. You have to have a little bit of luck, not having too many injuries the rest of the way, I believe. Try to get your squad healthy, in April and May. But being able to have that sort of depth and strong mentality, that's what Inzaghi needs, because, guys, they're not going to punt on any of these competitions. I mean, Bayern will be difficult in the round of 8 in Champions League. We'll see if Inter can advance. I believe they can, but it won't be easy. And then, of course, competing for Serie A, they're going to be very tired by the end of May, this group.
I feel like you're kind of answering all of our questions from our friend Dieter on Twitter. He asked 3 different questions.
I still want to answer, because Dieter is the absolute man. I love this dude. He used to support Calcio Connection. He goes way back. I love Dieter. So I'll answer again. I'll change my answers if I have to.
Twist.
So yeah, the 3 different questions. What are the chances of Inter against Bayern in the Champions League? Is Simone Inzaghi the best coach in Serie A nowadays? And who's the best player at Inter this season and why? Thanks for answering my questions in advance. No problem, Dieter, the GOAT. Yeah. Always retweeting our episodes before I'm even able to retweet it. The guy's super fast on Twitter. But I think we, you kind of bring it up talking about Simone Inzaghi. Talking about how he doesn't want to give up on any of the competitions. But in that sense, is he the best coach in Serie A right now?
I mean, it's either him or Conte for me. I have a soft spot. I have a soft spot for Conte. I feel like Inzaghi is it's definitely it's a prettier brand of football usually, although Napoli are easy on the eyes though, because a lot of that also has to do with who you have on the pitch. But like going back to like Conte's days with the Inter squad that he had, and with the Juventus squads, it wasn't always like the prettiest brand of football, but it's extremely effective. But Inzaghi, you get a little bit more when it's running on all cylinders, a little bit more champagne football. I think Inzaghi is he's historically a little bit more versatile. And I think Inzaghi, I'd probably rather have Inzaghi in Champions League, but I'd probably rather have Conte in Serie A. I think that's always been kind of the Conte style. Really fits better domestically, and Inzaghi probably a little bit more in European football. But yeah, to me, it's either one of those two. Like I'll ride with Inzaghi because he's my guy right now. And as far as Bayern, I haven't watched Bayern as much this year as I normally do. I saw what they did though to Bayer Leverkusen in the previous tie. It was like 5-0 aggregate, so they blew aside their domestic opponents there, and Bayern obviously historically has been a European power. So I think, but everything that I've seen with folks talking about that, and actually a really good friend of mine is a Bayern super fan. He used to be the president of the Miami Bayern fan club, and so we're already starting to talk a little trash. If I think statistically, if you look at the betting sites, I think Bayern are slight favorites to advance, but most people handicap it as pretty close to a 50-50. So I would give Inter a shot to get through Bayern, because obviously, and it's crazy now that we're talking Champions League. I talked about like Inter's inconsistent form in Serie A. They have been a different team in Champions League because they rarely allow any goals. They've only allowed 2 goals in the entire competition so far. Right. So I think if anything, like maybe Inzaghi is like, okay, defense is optional on the weekends, Saturdays and Sundays. we need to rest our back line for the Tuesdays and Wednesdays, because when it's a Serie A match, it's like, oh, I don't know, are they going to give up 2 goals, 3 goals today? But if it's Champions League, clean sheets are on the way. So with the Champions League form that Inter have been on, I absolutely give them a chance.
Do you think like I like that you brought that up, because it's something we've probably discussed amongst ourselves and like also discussed with friends probably. Do you think that Serie A right now, the reason why it's like that is because managerial wise, it's probably like the best club in the best league in the world in terms of like managers just knowing how to pit against each other. You know what I mean? Like they know how to. Do you think that's what the difference maker is for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think if anything, we've had more of a managerial evolution. It's finally reached Italy where, another form of defense is attacking, that like, packing the bus and having 11 men behind the ball like that. That's the way it used to happen with the Catenaccio days of Serie A. But I think even Italian managers and, the foreign managers who are in Serie A as well have evolved to a point where possession is also a form of defense, because the opponent cannot score if they don't have the ball. So I think it's evolved a little bit to this point. And, obviously more and more foreign players in Serie A, which is a good thing and a bad thing. Like on the one hand, you like the diversity, just having like players from different countries having different qualities and stuff. But then, on the other side, like, I think one of the reasons why the Azzurri used to be so great was, when obviously there used to be rules where your team had to be majority Italian. So you don't have as many Italians on the pitch in Serie A games. So maybe you don't develop as many of your Italian internationals as you used to. But but if nothing else, it's more exciting. And I say this as someone, guys, I don't mind a good 1-0 game. Like I'm always old school. Like I'm a man on an island, like down here in the States, especially in Florida, because in Florida there's a very a big Spanish influence, and a lot of people are fans of of the Spanish league, where it's just usually more free flowing and a lot more goals that get scored. So usually when I tell people, I'm a Serie A guy, they're like, oh, it's boring. Like 0-0 games, that's boring. Like, it's not boring to me. You give me like a good 1-0 dramatic, a lot of defense, a lot of saves and stuff, I don't mind it. But I know that in terms of like creating new fans for Italian football, having more goals and having, 2-0 come from behind wins, it's more exciting to most other people. So I'm okay with that too.